All right, we are live. Hello and welcome everybody on a Thursday night live at 8:30. And today we have a very special guest, Niti Nadarajah, who is a lawyer by profession and has two beautiful kids. Sorry, I kind of lost the page where it was. And I'm getting nervous. I'm going to start again. Hi everybody and welcome to our 8:30 live with Sangeeta on APOC. Niti is a senior in-house lawyer working in Melbourne with a special guest. But more than that, being a lawyer, Niti is also a woman, a mother and a human being. As she has grown into her career and life has thrown challenges at her, including juggling of motherhood, Niti has become an advocate of authenticity and vulnerability, mental health issues and diversity, equity and inclusion at her workplace, on LinkedIn and more broadly. She is passionate about leadership and demonstrates empathy and courage, kindness and vulnerability, and about helping others own their courageous, wonderful selves in what can at times be a precarious world. Now, that's what I have read, but I have to personally introduce Niti because I have known her for 1 year and I can be very comfortable doing that. And I have seen her self-promoting from last 1 year and following her journey through days. And I have seen her flourish and I think her journey is so inspiring. And that's one reason I have brought Niti today on our APOC group to share what it has been for her to open her personal side on a professional networking grounds and how that has helped her grow and helped her connect to the outer world and what has that experience been like. So Niti, over to you. Share your journey so far.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me as well. Look, the last year and a half, like for many people, has been a bit of a roller coaster, to be honest. And when I started last year, I had just returned to work after maternity leave. And that was literally in March, so it was just as COVID really hit Australia, and it was quite challenging because I suddenly went from being at home with a child to being at home with two children, and also trying to resume working and trying to work out what had happened over the 7 months that I'd been away. And so with no, water cooler chats left, it was LinkedIn kind of became my way of talking to people in a really odd kind of way. It kind of felt like a journal, kind of, but also like I was talking to the people that I knew. And I really didn't really think about LinkedIn as being a platform that was, I could meet people that I didn't know. It was for me just, here's a group of people I know. I either worked with them or, went to school with them or uni or something, or they're friends of friends or connections of friends, or and the odd occasional strange person who's decided to connect with me for some reason. And so that was kind of, how I jumped into the platform. And it was really just, things that I had going on for myself, or things that I'd started hearing, from other people, particularly in the return to work after maternity leave space. Having just returned in that space myself during COVID in a remote environment. And so I was talking about things like, the need to share what's going on in your home when you're on calls with work, right? So there was a lot of debate at the time around, do you have your video on? Do you have your video off? And I was like, I'm going to have my video on. And if that means you see me taking my son upstairs to change his nappy, then that's what you see. And so I would talk about these sorts of things initially on LinkedIn, but it wasn't really with a view to self-promote. It wasn't really with a view to do anything for myself personally or from a career perspective. And the first thing I think that really started to change was I started getting people coming to me and saying, that thing that you wrote today really helped me. I really needed to read that today. I needed to hear that. I feel seen. And I was like, this is not just about me just randomly writing. It's actually helping people. And so I started thinking about that more and was like, okay, there's a purpose here. I can do something with this. And as I started to write more and more and more, I became more comfortable with it. And there was a real turning point for me when I shared a story about my miscarriages, and it had been a story I wanted to share for about 2 years, and I hadn't really gotten up the courage to do it at work, even though I really wanted to, and I thought it was important from a mental health perspective to share it. So I finally decided to share it on LinkedIn because I, gained a little bit of comfort on the platform. And when I shared it, it was one of the scariest things I have ever done. But it was so rewarding, and people responded and shared their own stories. And interestingly, from that point on, I also then started to get people connecting with me and wanting to have conversations. I remember the first time someone reached out and said, "Hey, let's get on a phone call." And I was like, why? Why do you want to talk to me? I don't know, what for? And, so it was really strange to me. But as I started to do it more and more, I actually started to love it. And I think especially last year, when there was so much isolation, so much solitude because of lockdowns, it actually was the thing that kept me going through everything. It was, connection through disconnection, if that makes sense. And so last year was kind of, me really putting my feet in the water and feeling it, and sort of, trying to work out if it was for me and what my place was. And then from this year, all of a sudden, the opportunities started just rushing in. So, people started contacting me and saying, "Oh, I've been following you for a long time. I'd love you to write some articles for us." Or other people started talking to me about podcasts and all sorts of things. So this year has actually been, it's really cemented a lot of the work that I put into it last year. So that's kind of been my journey, and it continues. It's fantastic. I really love it.
Yeah, and I'm smiling through the time you said people started reaching out to you at that time, and I was probably one of them. And that's how I got to know Sangeeta as well. And beautifully said, connection through disconnection. I was looking for finding connection myself because there wasn't a human, connection much happening. And I started following a lot of people and started looking at the values that aligned and liked their content. I said, what's the worst that can happen? They can just say, "I'm not going to talk to you," but what's the best that can happen? What if they connect? And look, here we are 1 year down the line, and talking and hopefully meeting face to face. Niti, it's something very interesting, something that you said, when you started off, you did not have a plan of self-promoting. You started with the thought of sharing some of your stories. There's so much noise around knowing what you need to say in the platform, or, be prepared or be plan, and have Mondays you're going to post this, and Tuesday you got to post this. There's got to be a plan. Clearly that wasn't something that you had in mind, yet it worked. So what for you was the key takeaway around what kind of thoughts come to your mind before you start talking on a platform that big, and especially with your kind of presence, being a head of in a bigger organization where you've got your professional branding to think about, and then sharing something so intimate, like abortions, or losing a baby, or and something so intimate. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I think for me, obviously, it was a little bit more organic because I didn't start off with any intention. I thought I was speaking to friends. So for me, weirdly, it was, I just talked about anything and whatever was going on in my life on the day, or whatever conversation I'd had with someone, without giving away their confidence or without making it really clear who they were. I sort of talked about the theme, perhaps, of what they were discussing. So if there are issues that people were discussing with me around, women from maternity leave returning in remote working environments, and how people need to approach that, then I would talk about that, for example. And for me, the thing that resonates the most with me when I read other people's content, and I think this is always a good place to start, what appeals to you? What do you like reading? What appeals to me the most is stories. So when people share stories, it just draws me into what they're saying and how they're writing. And that's how I connect with people. And so for me, it was important to share in the same way. So I started sharing my own personal stories. Now, that works for me. And for me, vulnerability and sharing personal stuff on LinkedIn works. You know, it's a value of mine. It's something I believe in at the workplace as well. I think you need to, as a leader, be vulnerable with your people, because then you give them permission to be vulnerable. And I think we all needed this last year in particular, or these last 2 years in particular, because there's so much that's been going on, and people need to know that, you know, as a leader, you're okay to say things aren't great. I am struggling. And so if you're struggling, please tell me that you're struggling, because we're all in this together, right? So for me, vulnerability works, but it doesn't work for everyone. And everyone has different levels of comfort around what they want to share and how much they want to share. And, you know, I think this is really important. I think sometimes people think that, you know, oh my God, I've got to share my deepest, darkest secrets on social media. You don't need to do that, right? I mean, today I wrote a post today about the fact that I got my key, like I broke a key in a lock. You know, it's not a deep, dark secret. It's just something that happened. And I turned that story into a sort of a post on why sometimes you need to use experts. So, you know, I wasted all this time trying to get this stupid broken key out of the lock unsuccessfully. I tried a lot of different things, pulled out all sorts of things from my house to try and get it out. Didn't work. Eventually I had to call a locksmith. He got it out in 5 minutes. Cost me a bit of money, but I'd also spent a lot of time trying to get the key out of the lock, right? So you can turn things that happen in your day-to-day life into stories. And I think the power of metaphor and analogies is huge. You know, if you can find something that people can relate to, you know, it really works. I think I had another one day where I posted about not having closed my garage door, but not quite remembering if I had closed it or not. And so this sense of, you know, oh my God, I've forgotten it. And then you like snowball and you're like, oh, I really need to go back. Or no, I can't go, you know, and that whole feeling that you have when you've forgotten whether you've locked your car door or your front door or your garage or whatever it is, you know, that feeling that you get, that's a feeling people have a lot, right? Like we all have that from time to time. So I think, you know, if you can find those things that are just day-to-day life stories and use them to talk about something, then I think that's the easiest way to do it, right? But what I would say to people when you're starting off on social media and when you're doing it intentionally is sit down and really think about who you are to begin with. And that sounds like a really obvious and strange thing to do, but when you really sit down and you go, you know, what are your values? What do I really believe in? You'll be surprised. It can sometimes take you a while to work out exactly what that is and articulate it, because we all think that we have these values and we know that we have values, but when someone says, what are your values? Give me 5. That's a little bit harder to do. And so I think sitting down and going, okay, what are my values? What do those look like? You know, start with a big list, narrow it down as much as possible. Work out what your purpose is for being on the platform. You know, if you have a business and you need to get clients, you need to think about it from that perspective. So you need to think, okay, so how can I talk about things that would be of use to people that might be potential clients of mine? So I tell stories. I don't need to pitch them in a really, you know, come work with me, this is what I can do for you. But you share a story which then relates to the needs of your clients. Okay, and then perhaps you have a call to action at the end of your post or in your comments or something, right? But otherwise your purpose could simply be to gain exposure internally in your organization. Your purpose could be to gain exposure in the external world. So depending on what your purpose is, your writing and your content will change as well. So values, purpose, and the other thing I would think about is passion. What are the things you're really passionate about? You know, what are the things when you read, you go, oh, I have to write something about this. I have to read this. This looks really interesting. They're the things that make you you, right? So if you can infuse personality into what you're writing about, people get to know you more. And as people get to know you more, people come back for more. So they're the three things I would say you start off with.
That's really great take there, value, purpose, call to action, and passion. Sangeeta, do you have a question that you want to ask?
Yeah, we do have some questions coming in, but Niti, one of the things that I'm really one of the things that I find a lot on LinkedIn as well, and I'm sure there's many people who find this, is when you start off right on LinkedIn, like you said rightly, sometimes it takes a bit of time for you to work out who you really are and what you're really putting out there, the content that you're putting out there. But also a lot of times when we start thinking about it as, okay, I'm going to put stuff out there, you're actually to the point you made earlier, you make a post and something that you're really scared about or something that's really personal to you, and then you're like, what if people don't like it? And it's true though of social media. It's like not every post will get you 1,000 likes or 20 comments. Like there are some that just go under the radar. There's algorithms built into these platforms that treat things in a different way, and it's not like every post of yours becomes a super hit post. Tell me a bit about how you manage that, because I think with a lot of professionals of color, one of the things that we really want to encourage them to do is put themselves out a bit more and talk about themselves and talk about who they are. But, when you don't get the level of engagement that you think you should be getting, you could be discouraged and you could just say, okay, that's it, I'm not going to do any more of this. So how do you keep the momentum going, and what are your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and it's a very real fear. And I had exactly that fear and all those imposter syndrome type thoughts last year as well, because there would be times where, I'd write something and I'd be like, oh, this is really good, and you post it and you're like, no one's liked it. And I remember once even deleting a post because I was like, this is now embarrassing. I'm going to delete it. I don't want this out there anymore because it's just not got enough likes. And it will happen. It happens to everyone. Everyone who starts on social media starts somewhere. And so if you get 2 likes, if you get 3 likes, if you get 10, if you get 100, your next post might only be 5, right? And I see this. I had a post the other day I wrote about miscarriage. It's gotten an insane amount of views, like 140,000 views, right? And 1,300 likes or something. The next day I had a post that was 100, so it's, and it's all relative, right? Because I've been on there for a while now. So now my average number of likes or comments, etc., will be more around that, somewhere between the 50 to 100 and 50 to 200 mark, right? The likes and maybe comments might be slightly less, slightly more sometimes. It's all very erratic. But I think what you've got to say to yourself is, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this and I'm going to commit to doing it. And what I would recommend doing is saying to yourself, how long am I going to commit to this? And I'd give yourself a reasonable amount of time. Think about, what is sustainable for you in terms of how often you want to post things. Doesn't have to be every day. Last year I did decide at one point in time I'm going to do this every day just because I was like, I want to build something here, so I'm going to try to do it consistently. And the first time I didn't do it on a day, I was like, this feels really strange now. And now I actually say to myself, I'm purposefully not posting every day because I'm like, it becomes too obsessive as well when you do it every day. And so I'm like, I've got to pull back. And I've got to make it like more like 3-4 times. Otherwise, you're just posting for the sake of posting, right? So you also got to think to yourself, okay, am I posting quality? Because if I'm just posting for posting's sake, that's not worth it either, right? Yeah. But there was something else I was going to say, and I've forgotten what it was. So think about how often you're going to post. Then the other thing that's really important is, even if you're not posting, or even if you don't have inspiration on a particular day, go onto the platform and comment on other people's posts, because it's one of the surest ways to get visibility. Like I remember early on, I would have more likes on comments that I'd written on other people's posts than I would sometimes on my own posts. Yeah. But when I'd written on other people's posts, then, those people would potentially connect with me because of what I'd written on this other post.
Yeah.
And sometimes what you can do as well, which is quite valuable, is you can take your comment, which you've thought of in the moment and which was fantastically amazing, and turn that into a post itself, right? So I've done that a bit over time where I'm like, but yay, that was actually really good. Take that and make it it's your own content anyway. You wrote it.
Yeah.
So turn it into a post. And sometimes inspiration hits through that, but inspiration, I don't know, it's all around you. It's, you'll go for a walk and you might see something, right? And you might then write something about your senses, or about being outside in nature, or about self-care, or whatever it is. It just has to fit into your own purpose. And then you have to really, be strong-willed about the fear and the potential of rejection, because it will happen. It definitely will happen. Like, I don't think there'll be anyone who's on the platform that hasn't at one point in time had a post that's gone nowhere, right? And that's made them question what they're doing. And you do question it from time to time, and you go, why am I doing this? But you've got to think back to, what is my purpose? And if my purpose is, I want to help other people. If I help 2 people, or if I help 100 people, at the end of the day, it doesn't really make a difference. I still helped someone. So, you've got to anchor it back to, what is my purpose? If your purpose is to get clients, did I get a client? Yeah. Could I've got 50? Maybe, but I got 1. That's something, and you keep building from there.
Yeah, good points. I think what I'm really sensing through your answers, and even what you've been speaking so far, is all about how you've actually changed the definition of just self-promotion being more about helping others than just being about self. And I really like that approach. I think it's fantastic. I'm just going to take a question from Richa here, who's commented, and she's saying, how long does it typically take for you to be noticed by others? How persistent do you need to be to create your own personal brand?
You need to be persistent. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen overnight. You will most likely have one random post that somehow does amazingly well. I had one last year that again exploded, and I'd written it like in 10 minutes. I think I'd actually had a couple of glasses of wine before I wrote it, and I just read something. And I just literally had read something, and it was about miscarriage laws that had been leave that had been passed in New Zealand for people that had suffered from miscarriages, and which as you can tell is a topic I'm quite passionate about. But so I'd read this and I was like, wow, this is so amazing. And so I literally just sat there on the couch and went, I'll write something. And I just typed something out, didn't even really check it very much, and then posted it, and lo and behold, and I'm like, I can't keep up with all the reactions. So
I'm sure the wine really helped.
The wine helped.
You should probably buy that wine and
Yeah.
You want a viral post, drink that wine. Can you give us the name of the brand?
Yeah. So everybody who's listening, that's a goal.
Yeah, have some wine. No, but seriously, a bit of Dutch courage doesn't go amiss sometimes, and sometimes you need to work yourself up to post it and just go, do you know what, it's fine. The other thing I would recommend is don't overthink what you're writing. Posts don't last for very long. They only have visibility for a few days at a time, unless you've got a viral post, and then it might last for a few weeks. But typically it's a few days. So you don't need to stress about every little bit. And when you stress about it more, you actually spiral into dejection more if it doesn't do well, right? Versus if you spent 10 minutes writing it, it's like, oh well, it didn't go anywhere. Okay, I'll try again tomorrow.
So Niti, how long? I guess that question, coming back to Richa's question, I could answer for you, because as I said, it's been an year when I saw you starting in that journey, and I remember that viral post of yours because it kept popping onto my LinkedIn profile multiple times a day, and I'm like, what's going on? And I also remember the change in content post that, it became more personal, it became more vulnerable. Before that, it was not so much. There was, you could feel the difference in the posting content types. So I guess from Richard's perspective, and I think this is an important question because it's been asked by a lot of my clients as well, when I talk about creating visibility and going on LinkedIn and creating your profile and starting to talk about something that you're passionate about. The question which often comes is, how long do I have to do this to get visible? How long do I have to do this to get a job? Or how long do I have to do this to get a client? So in your personal experience, what I know that there is no right timeline. It's really different from person to person, but what's been your personal experience around the timelines with your growth?
So I probably started posting not so frequently, maybe in about March of last year. I had posted a little bit before that, so I had a little bit of a following before, but not, I'd post once every few months prior to that. So I started posting maybe every few weeks. I would post something, and then it was probably only, I think, shortly after I wrote that post on miscarriage. That was probably in about August, I think, roughly, could have been. So maybe a few weeks after that I sort of committed to posting every day. I think around that time I may have had, I don't know, maybe 1,000, maybe less followers. I think when I started the year, I would have definitely had under 1,000. And I think for the rest of that year, I was posting every day, mind you, right? So there's a consistency element here that is important. You don't have to post every day, but you have to work out what's sustainable and try and stick to it. So if you say to yourself, I'm going to post 3 times a week, post 3 times a week. Don't fall back on that, because if you fall back on it, you also lose the visibility a little bit. So I would post every day, and I'd say for those, next 5 months, it was really about building a little bit of a network, right? The opportunities didn't really start coming through until this year. So it was this year that started to happen, and all of a sudden, I was getting speaking engagements and I was getting writing engagements, including in my own industry, right? So this was where I think, the magic started to happen. So even though I wasn't necessarily posting anything about law as such, and I don't tend to write about I tend to write about my profession, but not about the subject matter of what I do for a living. And so this year I started getting some of those opportunities. So that, for me, that journey was, I'd say, more than 6 months before things started to eventuate from it. So you have to be patient with it. But in the meantime, you'll start creating connections with people. And I think you have to leverage those connections, right? So, think about who you want to connect with. Also, don't be too biased about who you connect with, right? Because sometimes people can surprise you, and the person who you least expect to be someone who can provide value to you provides enormous value to you, right? So think about who you're connecting with and engage with them offline, right? Really start to build those connections, because once you start building those connections, you get more visibility and more visibility. So I started, chatting to a group of female lawyers last year from the States, and slowly they started introducing me to more people, and then they would tag me in posts and say, where they were talking about people to follow, or, people whose content was interesting, or whatever. So all those sorts of things create a lot of visibility for you. It was the same thing with another legal influencer who's in the UK, and she posted like a TikTok about 5 people in the legal industry to follow on LinkedIn who are up and coming people to follow. And so I was in this list, which kind of blew my mind at the time. But, but from that, all of a sudden, that in that week, I had, 1,000 requests to connect. It was crazy. So, things happen, things will happen. But it does take a little bit of patience, particularly in those first few months, when it can be quite disheartening at times, because it is very slow. I would also say, don't share other people's content. Doesn't get you anywhere on the platform. Don't put articles in your content. Again, especially external from external platforms, that doesn't do well either. So there are a few tricks and things, that do help as well as you're posting. Does that answer the question?
It does. I think that the key takeaway here is being consistent and patient, and I think that's really important. And being original is another thing I would say is what I'm picking up here, is to stay original and commit to yourself and not fall short of that. I think that's one thing many of us fall short of. I'm guilty of that. I would start something and then I'll fall short because I get busy in the busyness of life. But I really command, and the people I follow, like yourself, I think that's a commendable trait to have, that with this consistency, and possibly that's the reason you're always on the top of the mind of people when they're looking for something, and they're like, oh, okay, I've seen Niti's post coming so many times, where can I get her value or advice? Versus, if somebody's looking for you and you haven't posted for 3 months, you probably missed out the opportunity because you weren't consistent enough. So, I think that's really a good takeaway. Just got another question from Jalpa, and I think this is again very close to my heart, because I also sail 2 boats. So, I'm always in this place. Should I post my professional content or should I post my personal content? So, Jalpa here is wanting to know, what is your suggestion for posts to promote myself in my own field? I get good engagement on generic posts, which can engage anyone on LinkedIn, but I want more posts about cybersecurity. However, people just don't engage as much on it. Yeah,
good question. I think if you're going to talk about something like cybersecurity, and there are people on LinkedIn that do, think about how you can make it entertaining. People want to be entertained as well when they're reading things, and that first line or two is really critical. Like you need to write something in those first 2 lines that makes people stop scrolling, right? So I always pull out from my story the strangest line, right? Or the climax, and I stick it in the top, and then at least they stop scrolling. So what I would say with something like cybersecurity is, you must have stories, Jalpa, that would be, stories that you can share around, why cybersecurity is important, or what goes wrong when you don't have the measures in place. The what goes wrong stories in this sort of space would be gold, right? Because you want to appeal then, I guess, to an emotion in people. So if that emotion is, oh my God, it's fear, right? For example, it's like, okay, so how can I make people afraid, right? This is what's going to go wrong if I don't get this right, and these are the consequences. So you write it as a story, and then at the end, if your call to action is, reach out to me, I can help you with this, right? That's what you write at the end, right? So frame it as a story. I mean, it's interesting. Someone said to me in an interview maybe a month ago, they said to me, oh, you're really good at storytelling. Would you think about it as a career? And I was like, the thing is, we can all tell stories as part of whatever job, profession, business we're in, right? Storytelling is just a method through which you connect to other people. And I've seen people do it with insurance. I've seen people do it with tax. These are not exciting topics by any means. But what these, at least in my view, I don't know, there might be a tax person out there, I'm sorry. From my own personal view, it's not very exciting for me, but the way these people write their posts is they'll write it as a story. So if they're talking about insurance, they might tell a story which demonstrates why you need to have insurance, right? If it's about tax, again, it'll be something that's a story. And when you can do that and you can write it through story, and then also, I guess, mix it up with other content as well that gets people to know who you are. So you're like, okay, I'll write once in a while about cybersecurity. The next, I might have 3 posts a week, right? In my 3 posts a week, what are the sorts of topics I want to talk about? Maybe I want to talk one day about cybersecurity. Maybe another day I want to talk about, I don't know, courage or something. Another day, perhaps I want to talk about mental health. So, if you think about it like that, then you can sort of frame your content, and then people get to know who you are. and what you stand for, but also what you do and how you can help people.
Yeah, good one. Niti, I'm going to delve a little bit more because your content, you're like this content person, right? So tell us a bit more about when you say write a story. I think sometimes people struggle with that, right? How do you write a good story? Do you have a secret sort of template that you can share, or just something that, how do you write your stories? Like, do you start with something in particular and then, is there a flow you follow? Like, tell us a bit about your method.
I don't know. My method is a little bit of just free flow, but there are definitely storytelling methods out there, right? And I think what you need to think about is there are a few things, right? So it's what is the issue, right? What is the scene, I guess, what are you doing? What's the context of the story? And these are short stories, because LinkedIn, you don't want to have gigantic posts. And especially as the algorithm changes, I think the longer posts don't really do very well. So you want to keep it fairly short and snappy. So over time, I've learned how to condense my writing. So I pull out the most important bits and I don't add all the additional stuff that you might otherwise tell with a story, right? If you're talking in person. So what is your context, right? Who is your main character? What is the climax of the story? So what is the aha moment, or the moment that was like, oh my God, this thing happened, right? And then what is the call to action? What is the thing that people can take away from your story? So as an example, the other day I wrote a post about my daughter, and I think my son was crying. He was throwing a tantrum or something. And she had this little fingerling monkey. I don't know if you know the fingerling toys. They're the ones you stick on your hands and they make funny noises, right? Anyway, so she started showing my son, or her brother, this toy. And so he stopped crying and he was happy and, laughing and whatever else. Then she went to leave. And in the meantime, actually, before she left, she told me that the monkey's tail had fallen off somehow. Because I think I'd said, oh, what's happened to its tail? She said, oh, I think it fell off in the box or something. Anyway, she went to leave, and my son started throwing a tantrum again because now he wanted the toy, right? So I said to my daughter, can you give him the monkey? I'll get you a new one. I'll get you another one. And she said, no, I don't want a new one. I want this one. And I said, well, I'll get you a new one and it'll have a tail as well. And she said to me, no, this monkey is special and it's unique and it's mine and I want this monkey. And that was my story. And then at the end, I had, I think, 2 or 3 sentences which were, be like my daughter, celebrate difference, recognize the uniqueness, celebrate difference, or something, something like that. So it was a post about diversity and inclusion, right? But you take a story that's actually happened. It's like, you don't need to, make it up. Use the stuff that's happening in your life. I do it all the time. I literally, will be going through my daily life and I'll be like, oh, that was really interesting. There's something in this. There's something I can take away from what's just happened here. And then I'll think about it for a bit and go, that was quite special because she wanted the monkey that didn't have the tail. I thought she'd want the monkey that was full and intact, but she didn't. So, so I don't think there's necessarily a method to it, but, you need to have something happen in the story or an aha moment. And you need to think about what's in it for the person that's reading it. What can they take away from what I'm writing?
Yeah, great points. I'm just going to pick up Jalpa's question here, which is quite interesting. She says, I'm posting to build my personal brand and help others with my experience. With increased visibility comes increased job offers. I know it's not the case topic tonight, but how do you assess new opportunities, whether to stay or go?
As in new job opportunities?
Yeah, like do you take up the opportunity or do you just let it pass?
I guess it depends. I mean, that's a very personal question, I think. I think you need to assess where you're at and are you wanting to leave? Are you happy where you're at? I don't know. I mean, I think that's a very personal question, depending on where you are in your life and what you want out of your career. But yes, with branding comes all sorts of different opportunities, and you might get job offers, you might get speaking opportunities, writing opportunities, collaboration opportunities, opportunities to help other people in their business, maybe even be part of a new business, board seats, all sorts of things. I think you have to think about what you want. And I think, importantly as well, for me, one of the things that I had to think about recently, because I was offered, perhaps the opportunity of a board seat recently, and I was like, these 2 years have been so intense, and I actually need to have time for me now, and I can't take on more. And this is something I've to some degree struggled with over the last 2 years, is as things have grown and as things have gotten bigger and bigger, and now I get more engagement on my content. So actually it means more time that you have to spend responding to people and engaging with people and everything else, which is great, but it takes time, and then you have all these, interviews and articles and everything else. It's like, you can only do so much. So you've also then got to start thinking to yourself, what aligns and what doesn't align, and, what really works for me. But I've just seen Jolpa's additional question about loyalty in today's market. Yes and no. Like, people move jobs all the time nowadays. It's becoming more common than not that people will change jobs, every couple of years or every 3 years. I don't think it's unusual anymore. So no, I don't think loyalty matters as much in today's job market.
On the contrary, I think the more variety you have in your basket, the more attractive you are becoming, because they are kind of assessing that against the fact that you are adaptable, you manage change well, you've got so much of experience. So I agree, it doesn't matter. I also understand where it comes from, because a lot of us come from from an era where our parents were loyal to their jobs. Whatever they did, they picked it up at a young age and they went on. And if it was a business, then they started their business because it was a family business, and they stuck to it. And there wasn't a lot of discussion around passion and purpose and where you want to go with that. But still, I think a lot of professionals of color get stuck to that loyalty. I think a couple of questions that come at the back of that is, when you get stuck in those kind of thinking, especially when you're early on self-promoting yourself and you're not getting engagement and you're like, maybe I should delete this. What are your ways to fight that imposter syndrome, let's say, and keep going at it, not to stop? There are bad days, there are good days, and then not so good days. What is your personal practice around, getting up and going again?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. And I think the biggest thing for me is coming back to your purpose. What is your purpose, and holding true to that purpose and letting that purpose guide you. And the other thing I would say is, your brand is not one post or another post. Your brand is the sum of your posts. It's the sum of your content. It's the sum of what you do off social media. Social media is only one component of your personal brand, right? Like, it's not your entire personal brand. You build your personal brand in your daily life. You build your personal brand through your interactions with people at your workplace or within your business or your clients and everything else. So this is just one component. Right? It just is, it's the component that helps you get a lot of visibility in a bigger environment quicker or faster. But it's just one component. So I would say, come back to your why. When you have those moments, and I have those moments from time, and I still have those moments from time to time. There are some days I have posts that don't do as well. And for me now, not doing as well is relative compared to how my posts normally do, right? And so if I have a post that, gets 30 likes or something, I'm like, oh, what happened? And am I doing something wrong? And, but it happens, and, and you laugh, but it'll happen to, you as well, where you, as your profile grows.
But 30 likes are like
you get used to
someone else, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly. I know. And this is what I have to keep reminding myself and going, it's all relative. because this is not bad, this is fine, this is okay.
Yeah.
But you get in your head because you have a certain expectation that's grown over time, and then you're like, oh, hang on, there's a blip, and this isn't quite right. But the blips are normal, right? They're a normal part of life. They're a normal part of social media content creation. Think about your content over the space of a month rather than a space of, a day or even 2 days or 3 days, right? And think of it as the average of that rather than one post at a time. And as I said before, content does not live, it does live forever on the internet, but it doesn't live forever in front of, from a visibility perspective with other people, right? So what you write today, people won't necessarily remember 5 days from now, okay? Or it won't be in front of them 5 days from now. So if you have a post that doesn't do so well, it'll be gone before you know it.
I guess we think of ourselves more than people think of us.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's exactly right. So.
Niti, can I draw you back to something away from and you just touched on this in terms of, you're not just your posts, and social media is just one aspect of it. I'm really curious to know, your career journey so far. I think we went straight into, LinkedIn and your posts and things, but I'm really curious to know, what's your career journey been so far, and how have you, how have you promoted yourself, or how have you sort of spoken about yourself offline, and gotten yourself into the the roles, the kind of roles that you wanted to go into, and sort of climb that ladder? Can you give us a bit of, just tell us a few stories around that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, and I'll be honest, I wasn't very good at self-promotion, and I think this is something that people of color, sometimes, not always, because that's a generalization, sometimes, most of the times perhaps, have an issue with, because it's the way we're brought up as well. We're not brought up to self-promote. It's just not comfortable to go out there and say, hey, I'm amazing, right? You just don't do it. And so I really struggled with it for quite a long time. And I think I had this very naive, or I did have a very naive belief that my work would speak for itself, and that, if I worked hard and if I did, what needed to be done, and I did it well, then that would be sufficient. But it's not. It's in no way sufficient. And I think it was only, when I first had my first blip, which was when I came back from maternity leave after my oldest was born, and I was like, people have forgotten who I am. People I knew have moved on. I have to build my name again now. Now I have to start from scratch. And then suddenly I had this additional complexity of now being a mother, and now having the perception issues that go along with motherhood sometimes as well, and flexible work and all of those sort of things. And so it became really difficult. And I was suddenly facing all these issues around how people viewed me. Mm-hmm. And so it was only, I think, a few years later that, I was involved in a project on flexibility. And I was kind of put into this group to work on this project. And I was like, I really don't want to work on this, because I have such vehement views about what we need to do in this space of flexibility. It's actually going to make me emotional, because of the issues I had myself. And so really didn't want to do it, but I had to, because I was put in this group. So, and as I started doing it, I was like, actually I can change things here. I can make an impact on how we're doing this in the organization. And it was the first time I ever shared really my own personal stories within a workplace context. And so, I did this project, and I became really passionate about the project, and I ended up leading the project as a result. And then I shared with the organization some of my own experiences around flexibility. And it was hard, because I'm talking about a manager, who still with the business, not necessarily in Australia at the time, but still with the business. People would know who I'm talking about, and so it's hard, and you do wonder, what will people think if I'm talking about this sort of thing within the workplace. But it was important for me because, again, coming back to the purpose of what I was doing at that moment, it was this stuff needs to change. There are perception issues with women returning from maternity leave and taking flexible work up. There are perception issues with men who decide they want to work flexibly. So, all these things need to change, and we need to change the culture. And so it became more about that. And so that propelled me to keep going and to keep sharing. And I think after that project, then I got involved separately in a similar thing, but on mental health. And then from there, I got involved in another one on recognition. And interestingly, the things that I think led to my promotion at work were not my work. I mean, my work was good. It had to be good in order to get the promotion. But, it was these other things that I was doing along the side. Like, it was the other things that showed that I was stepping up and leading. And sometimes you don't need to stand up and wave your hands and go, look at me, I'm so good, this is what I do, right? You can stand up there and say, this is a topic that is important to me. Here's why it's important, and here's why I believe we need to do something, right? And if you use your voice in that manner, people will view you as a leader, right? Without you saying it. And so I think that's the difference. You can self-promote without it being pretentious or arrogant, or it can coexist with humility.
Fantastic. This is sort of related. It's a question from Jasveer, and she left this for us yesterday on the post where I asked, for people to give us questions for you. And she said, if you can tell her about the do's and don'ts in an interview, especially when you want a job you have no experience of, and when you're changing careers, how do you sell yourself in that case?
I think you have to. So I think the first thing with an interview is, you may not tick all 5 boxes that they want. You may tick 4 boxes or 3 boxes, right? You've got to sell yourself in those 4 boxes or 3 boxes and go, here's why I want to, here's why I'm good. And, here's why you need me at your company. You also have to sell to them, very importantly, why you work for them. And I think that's often half the battle is, what is it about working at this organization that appeals to you? And you need to draw the things together. So what I always do with interviews is, not that I've done one for a long time, but you sit down and you go through their website, and I will scroll through websites like in a lot of detail, right? So I will read annual reports if I really want a job, right? I will read everything and go, there's a really interesting thing here. This thing aligns with my values. I really like this. This is really important. So you want them to know a little bit about who you are in the interview, right? So the things that interest you. You want them to know what you're good at, right? So think about, what are the things that you're good at that align to what they've put in their ad, and try and link the 2 things together. And then you talk about the fact that you're adaptable, the fact that you love to learn, the fact that, this is one of the things that excites you about this job, is that actually you don't know it all, but that you can learn on the job. You can turn the things that are the missing bits into something else if you think creatively about it.
Yeah.
So, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jasveer, I hope you're listening today, but I think those are some great, tips on how you can actually look at things for an interview and sort of do things a bit differently, I suppose. So yeah, thank you. I think that's very helpful. Niti, in terms of your own sort of journey as a professional of color, have you found it difficult has that, being a professional of color, has that had any sort of negative impacts or barriers, do you feel like, for yourself? Have you ever felt, and this is something we discuss with every guest that comes on the show, because I think as professionals of color, it's really important for people to listen to these stories as well. And, and and please be candid, like tell us, things that really, really have have blocked your progress or not really let you move ahead in life? Have you had any of those barriers as a professional of color?
Look, I think overtly, no, right? I don't think overtly I've experienced anything where I would say, that was quite obviously because I'm a person of color.
Yeah.
Now, I think from a personality standpoint and from an inclusion standpoint, there is a difference in the way people are brought up culturally, right? And so I would say, one of the things for me is that, I am generally, or have been at least, or used to be, quite quietly spoken. And so I don't have the loudest voice in the room by any means. And so I have had to learn how to have my voice heard in a room, particularly if I'm in a room full of men who are white, right? Because then it's not only the color aspect, but it's also the female aspect. And I think, to be honest, like, I felt the female aspect more than I felt the color.
Yeah.
So, I think that for me is a big thing, but that's influenced by culture, right? I remember going to a wedding and my mum and family friends were like talking about how the bride was smiling too much, and needed to be looking down more, and just, this is what we grow up with, right? You grow up with this, like, you need to be demure if you're the woman. And, so you not always, like, there are definitely, Indian or subcontinental women that are, very outspoken and very gregarious and all the rest of it. But there is a cultural expectation, and there's a view of, women in particular, but also men to some degree, that, that step outside that line and that do something different or behave differently. So I think that can influence the way you show up in a workplace. So for me, it's more about how do you overcome some of those things. And, it goes both ways, right? You need representation in organizations at senior levels so that people can understand that some of these issues might be there, and how do you then help people to, step outside of those comfort zones and really be heard and be seen, and I think, you would see with, with people perhaps who are from an Asian background, like a Southeast Asian background as well, sometimes it's the same thing. Like, they can face some of the same issues in terms of how you present in a workplace. So for me, it's the, how do you have a voice? And I have had to learn how to be more extroverted than I am, in order to have a voice in those settings. And and you have and allies. I think allies are really important, like having someone in whatever, whether you're in middle management or upper management, or you're a junior starting off, having allies at different levels of the organization where you can go, okay, this person's got my back, right? And I remember having this conversation with a woman who was also on management team with me, and we were reflecting on the fact that sometimes we'd try and say something and the men would talk over us, right? And we'd look at each other and go, oh, here we go again, and we're like, why are we doing that? Instead of rolling our eyes, next time it happens, let's find a moment to go, oh, I think Niti was trying to say something, or I think, the other person was trying to say something. So you almost have each other's backs in that moment. So yeah, that's how I've experienced it.
Yeah, no, it sounds interesting. I know we're running out of time. It's 9:30. Any final questions, Viniti, from you?
No, I think we've got really good information for me to write a blog on this. So, there's been some really interesting conversation that we have had, Niti. So thank you again for coming in. I know, you're always running short on time. It's been a really big pleasure to have you on live today with us. We'll keep in touch. We are planning to get together to see everybody face to face. And we would love to have you, and anybody who's listening on the call who wants to possibly join us to meet the speakers. That's something in the pipeline. So make sure that you're watching and connecting with the speakers as well. So another open invitation, anybody who likes Niti and want to follow her and connect with her, please find her on LinkedIn. She is great, and she has really been I suppose, very insightful for me personally and professionally, to kind of learn how you can merge the two in the professional area as LinkedIn. So some great inspirational stories keep coming from that side all the time. That's it. I'll let everybody go and have a very good night. Over to you, Sangeeta.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you, Niti. We really enjoyed having that conversation with you. Stay tuned for our next episode, which will be in a fortnight, Thursday nights at 8:30. We have Eugenia Yon, who's joining us. She is the community coordinator at RMIT and also the founder or co-founder of Inspiring Chats. And so next month, our topic or our theme is all about communication. And Eugenia is going to come talk to us about how to communicate effectively and build powerful networks. So look forward to seeing you all then. And Niti, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. And we look forward to meeting you in person at some point.
Absolutely. Likewise.
Thank you.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.